LA City Controller Ron Galperin warns of rising costs the city is facing in a detailed report that's now available online.
We have to make sure that we are not overcommitting ourselves, or what we will see is a cut in services, and nobody wants to see that.
Controller Ron Galperin referring to the city's latest financial report for fiscal year 2019. The good news is city revenue is actually up from the previous year, up 13.7% to over $18 billion. The not so good news is that city expenses are also up 7.5% to over $15 billion. Controller Galperin is urging the city to rein in those costs, especially since it's unclear if the increased revenue from LA's airports and harbor will continue, given the coronavirus and trade war with China. Some of the spending the city should be cautious of include city employees' salaries, benefits, and retiree health care. Also the cost of building permanent supportive housing for the homeless.
It is now about 3.5 years since the voters approved Measure Triple H, intended to create up to 10,000 permanent supportive housing units. Unfortunately, very few of those units have actually been produced, and the ones that are at a very high price.
Galperin says up to $700,000 per unit, and they usually take several years to build.
And so among the recommendations that I've made is how do we look at ways to build faster? How do you look at prefab? How do you look at micro units? How do you encourage the private sector to create?
Galperin says the city also has hundreds of little-known special purpose funds just waiting to be spent. He says untapped funds totaling hundreds of millions of dollars could be put to good use.
For example, we've got well more than a dozen different funds relating to housing, and some of that money's been sitting there for a while. How do you actually bring those funds together in a way that makes sense? And how do you make sure that the rules that we had for those funds are not so restrictive as to make it nearly impossible to spend?
As mentioned, you can find a lot of this in the Controller's annual report measuring the quality of city services. Other highlights include details on how 311 service calls increased, but wait times dropped. And over at our libraries, visitors may have decreased, but 1 million more materials were checked out. Check out the rest at lacontroller.org/CAFR 2019.